Our podcast reviews well-known movies and contains spoilers. The podcast may contain mature subject matter and mature language. Listener discretion is advised. Enjoy the show.
Quiet on set. Places, everybody. And action.
Welcome, everyone, to the Hooked on Movies podcast. Today, we will be looking at the 1986 sports drama Hoosiers. With me are Ken.
Sun don't shine on the same dog's ass every day, but mister, you ain't seen a ray of light since you got here.
And Ted.
My practices aren't designed for your enjoyment.
And I'm Eric. My team's on the floor. And our team is here, and we are looking at Hoosiers. Ted, give us the details of this one.
Okay. Hoosiers is directed by David Anspaugh with a screenplay by Angelo Pizzo. It has a running time of 115 minutes. It had a release date of November 14th, 1986. It had a budget of $6 million and a box office gross of $28.6 million. Hoosiers stars Gene Hackman as Norman Dale, Barbara Hershey as Myra Fleener, Dennis Hopper as Shooter Flatch, Sheb Woolley as Cletus Summer, Maris Valanis as Jimmy Chitwood, David Niedorf as Everett Flatch, Brad Long as Buddy Walker, Steve Holler as Ray Butcher, Brad Boyle as Whit Butcher, Wade Schenck as Ollie McClellan, Kent Poole as Merle Webb, and Scott Summers as Strap Pearl. And an interesting note, one of the guys, his name was Ray Kraft. He actually is in the movie. He's the man who greets the Hickory team at the Hinkle Fieldhouse. He was actually the guard on the Milan High School, Indiana high school team that the Hoosiers is based off of. So that's kind of interesting.
Gotta love the names of these kids, huh?
Oh, yeah.
They actually even got one of the original broadcasters to reprise his role as a broadcaster for the main game, too.
Well, what did the critics think of this one? I know it got nominated for 2 Academy Awards.
Yeah, so on the Rotten Tomatoes, critic score is a 91% certified fresh. It has an audience score of 88%. I was able to find one negative critic. Pat Graham from the Chicago Reader said, Bobby Knight would not be amused, though Tark the Shark might have had a good laugh at the naive masquerade. On the positive side, we had Rita Kempley from the Washington Post. She said, even though we've seen it all before, Hoosiers scores big by staying small. Paul Anastasio from the Washington Post, I don't know why they had 2 people covering the same movie, but they did. He said, the movie's enormous craftsmanship accumulates till you're actually seduced into believing all of it's Pepperidge Farm bumcum, and that's quite an achievement. Roger Ebert, of course, from the Chicago Sun-Times, he said, the climax of the movie will come as no great surprise to anyone who has seen other sports movies. Hoosiers works a magic, however, in getting us to really care about the fate of the team and the people depending on it, in the way it combines sports with human nature. It's a movie that is all heart.
What did it get?
4 out of 4.
Oh, all right. So, when was the first time you saw this movie, Ken?
Cable.
Shocking.
On one of the movie channels, right after, as soon as it became available on the movie channel, so probably 1987, probably, sometime around there. And actually, I used this movie when I graduated high school. I started coaching community basketball. I coached community basketball for a few years. And I thought it would be so good if I taught the 3 passes. 3 passes before you shoot. Boy, was I stupid and gullible back then, huh?
What did you grow up in the 1950s?
No, did you start hitting the kids too?
Back then, I thought that was one of the best things for people to learn. There are some cool things in the movie. The drills, like bouncing the basketball with the opposite hand and going over each chair. I thought that was pretty cool.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
I mean, I wanted to be Gene Hackman. I wanted to be that coach, you know. I mean, that's really the only basketball movie around that time that people even cared about.
You got your one-on-one, obviously, but
Right.
right,
I wasn't gonna be that coach though.
right. You don't want to be that coach. So I'm a big Gene Hackman fan, but people who know me kind of know that I'm not a real big basketball fan. So this movie actually kind of just passed by me on the radar, and I've never seen it. First time I've ever seen Hoosiers was this week. How about that?
It's shocking.
I know, and it's crazy. I meant to see it. It just never got around to it. So I'm glad we just got a time to sit down and watch it. How about you, Ted?
I was probably in the second or third grade when the movie came out, so I wouldn't have went and seen it then. But where I grew up in Southern Illinois, high school basketball is king. Like, even when I played basketball in grade school, a VHS copy was shown to us. So it's always kind of been there as far as I can remember. So I can't really pinpoint exactly like the exact first time. But in high school, I wasn't good enough to play, but I was a manager on the team. But I got to go to high school gyms with the team that are really similar to some of the gyms that they play in this movie. One that sticks out that I can remember distinctly is there's a little town in Illinois called Riverton. We played a game there. Their gym smelled like chlorine because the pool was attached to the gym. It's just little things like that.
Was Jimmy Stewart there too? And
Yeah.
No, it wasn't underneath. It was off of the gym.
And you can just smell the chlorine.
It smelled like a swimming pool. It was crazy. But I mean, I spent so many nights going around Southern Illinois playing in these little gyms. Like, we had two rivals from my high school that their gyms weren't big enough to hold a crowd. And they actually had to play their home games when they played us. I mean, my school had 650 people in it. So it was not a huge school. But we would have a crowd big enough that they couldn't handle the crowd. So they had to play their home games against us in our own gym. I know this life. The movie is endearing that way. That makes it special.
I went to Christian schools growing up, and I was on the basketball team. Kind of a similar experience, because when you think of Christian schools, you don't think of big gyms with a lot of seating. One thing I would say is, doing the research, I watched a YouTube thing that showed all the gyms and the places that were filmed 25 years later, and how exactly they all still kind of look the same. Even the outdoors, the towns that they filmed the outside shots in, nothing had changed. I mean, you might have had a building knocked down and maybe something repainted, but it looked eerie, similar to 25, 30 years ago. It was kind of cool. I like seeing real towns and what they look like now compared to what they looked like when the movie was filmed. Because I'm sure they used this town because it looked like a town in 1950, 51.
Yeah, I mean, this movie could have been made in a lot of southern Illinois towns. It's funny because in some of the couple of the gyms that they play in, at the one end of the gym is the stage. We played teams that had that all the time. I could go on and on all day about the different gyms. One of the neatest gyms that we played in, Jacksonville Route High School. It's a Catholic high school. Their gym is shaped like a hexagon. It's one of those weird, odd places. They're little more than barns.
It's cool looking, though. I mean,
yeah, it brings back a lot.
Looking at this movie and looking at the gyms that they play in is kind of unique and kind of cool, and you wish that you could be kind of like in the stands rooting on a game. What these gyms remind me of now is really elementary school type of gyms, because elementary school gyms kind of have that basketball / stage, theater stage kind of courts, whereas modern high schools have their stages completely on the other end of the building. They're not near the basketball court. I think it's fun doing sports in small communities. I remember I used to bowl a lot, and me and my friend would go into these tournaments, and we would go to a tournament in Southern Illinois, and it would be like 6 lanes. The bowling alley only had 6 lanes. And it was like
the bowling alley in town?
The bowling alley in town where the tournament was.
Damn, 6 lanes.
6 lanes. it felt like you were bowling in a bowling alley of the 1940s, 1950s. You didn't feel like anything was automatic. Everything was manual. Like there was people back there setting up pins and rolling balls back to you and things of that nature. It was really weird. We were semi-freaked out by it. I look back on it and wish I could have, just enjoyed it a little bit more, because now I realized that might be something I may never experience again.
These little gyms, they always had weird lighting schemes. So we had to, part of the scouting that the team would have to do during the week, because I was there for practice, you had to know how the shadows would come onto the backboard, because it would mess up your depth perception and everything. And the smaller the gym, the lighting was weird. So there's a lot of nostalgia that I have for this. It's one of those wild things. And I guess I can put this here. The movie was based off of Milan High School in Indiana. They were the smallest high school. They only had 86 enrollees in the school, and that won the Indiana State Championship when it was still a all-comers state championship, meaning there was no class system. There was only one champion.
That changed, I think, in like 97?
Then 97, they were the last. Indiana was the last to implement a class system. There was a possibility that they were going to use a town in Illinois to be more of the basis for the movie. The town in Illinois is called Hebron, Illinois, and it's just north of Woodstock up here. They were one of the smallest schools to win the Illinois State Championship when it was still an all-comers state championship. And the interesting thing about the Hebron winning is they actually beat Quincy Senior High School to win their state championship.
Why is that so interesting, Ted?
That's where I grew up. My mom went to Quincy Senior High, so that whole side of my family went there. Not so much anymore, but there was a point in time where Quincy Senior High School was one of the preeminent high school programs in the state, up alongside some of the Chicago teams. It was a big deal that little Hebron beat somebody who's a power. As a point of note, Centralia, Illinois, is the leader nationally for the most wins by a high school basketball program. For the longest time, Quincy Senior High School was number 2. They've slipped now to number 5, but everybody would think that, it's got to be somebody from a team from Florida, one of these academies, or a team from California. But it's actually, like, out of the top 5, 3 of the top 5 most winningest high school programs in the country are from Illinois: Collinsville, Centralia, and Quincy.
So somehow this podcast went into like IHSA sports.
It's like school history, yeah. So.
Yeah.
But it's interesting that, how they came about.
But it's so loosely based.
It's extremely loosely based.
It's almost not even the same scenario, because Milan was actually in the Final Four the year before they won the championship. They beat a team in the quarterfinals that even had a smaller school than they did. Most fascinating thing was they beat Oscar Robertson's team.
Yes.
To get to the semi. But a lot of these things, like the coach was only 24 years old. He wasn't even an old guy like Gene Hackman. And like I said, they were a good team before he even showed up.
His name was Bobby Plump. He was the Indiana's male basketball player of the year, because Indiana is known as basketball central.
Sure.
And so the Indiana basketball player of the year, Larry Bird was that. So, as an example. He was a huge player.
But the thing was, even though they were a small school, they had a lot of kids try out for the team. It wasn't like this 5 or 6 or 7 players that the movie has. They actually had a full 10-person roster with them telling other people they couldn't play because their roster was full. So it wasn't like, so this comparison
it's a dramatic effect.
It's very loosely. And it kind of frustrates me when I hear, hey, this movie is based on an actual event that happened. And then you look into the event that happened and it's like, really? The only thing that is actual is the last shot is from the same point to win the game. But that game, the final score of that game, 32-30.
Right,
and
not 40.
It was one of those games where they just held the ball for very long periods of time. I think there was one period of time where for 4 minutes they held the ball.
That's how the game was played in
Yeah.
the 1940s and 1950s. It's a completely different game than
Totally
it is.
different game than it is now.
I mean,
Cool thing I learned was that the arena they play in at the end for the championship game is
Hinkle
Butler
Fieldhouse.
University. Really enjoyed that. And I think one of the players of the original team actually went to Butler and played.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll get into more about the actors that play them because there's some interesting facts about the actors who play them, their basketball backgrounds and things of that nature. We'll wait till later to talk about it.
I remember from being a kid watching college basketball, that was always one of the iconic places was Hinkle Fieldhouse in Indiana. It's like live from Hinkle Fieldhouse. I remember distinctly.
Back
that.
in the day.
It's very loosely based, but it's what's kind of neat though. It does keep their memory alive that it's based off of them, because then somebody will go look and get the real story, and so it kind of keeps their memory.
Yeah, but it's
alive.
disappointing. It's disappointing when you actually find out the real story to a certain extent. Kind of like me with Remember the Titans, me going and searching into that and finding out that a lot of that stuff didn't happen either. But that's for another podcast.
We still need to go over the plot. Tell us about the movie, Ken.
Okay, 1951. Norman Dale arrives in rural Hickory, Indiana. His old friend, high school principal Cletus Summers, has hired him as civics and history teacher and as head basketball coach. The townspeople passionate about basketball are disappointed that Hickory's best player, Jimmy Chitwood, has left the team following the death of the previous coach, who had been like a father to Jimmy. At a meet and greet, Dale tells the townspeople he used to coach college basketball. The next day, fellow teacher Myra warns Dale not to recruit Jimmy. She is encouraging Jimmy to focus solely on his studies so that he will have a future away from Hickory. The small school only has 7 players. At the first practice, Dale dismisses Buddy Walker for rudeness, causing another player, Whit Butcher, to walk out in his practice. Dale begins drilling the others with fundamentals and conditioning, but no scrimmages or shooting, much to the Huskers' dismay. Wilt later apologizes to Dale and rejoins the team. Dale instructs the Huskers to pass 4 times before shooting. During the season opener, Ray disobeys and repeatedly makes baskets without passing first. Dale benches him for the rest of the game, even when Merle fouls out, leaving only 4 Huskers on the floor. In the next game, when a rival player jabs Dale in the chest during an on-court argument, Ray jumps to his defense and hits the player. During the altercation, Principal Summers, acting as an assistant coach, suffers a mild heart attack. Dale further erodes community support by employing a slow defensive style that does not immediately produce results. Dale also loses his temper on court and gets ejected from 2 games. With Summers laid up, Dale asks former Husker Wilbur Shooter Flatch, Everett's alcoholic father, to be his assistant coach, with the requirement that Shooter be sober during all games and practices. Shooter agrees on the condition that Dale does not get ejected from any more games. Dale's choice of Shooter confounds the town and embarrasses Everett. Mid-season, disgruntled townspeople decided to vote on dismissing Dale. Before the meeting, Flanner, sensing something amiss regarding Dale's past, uncovers years-old information about his hitting a player and being banned from coaching in college forever. However, Flanner chooses not to reveal the fact to the townspeople, instead telling them at a meeting to give Dale another chance. Nevertheless, they vote to fire the coach, but then Jimmy Chetwood arrives and announces he will join the team, but only if Dale remains as coach. A new vote is taken, and the residents overwhelmingly choose to keep Dale. After Jimmy's return, the Huskers rack up a series of wins. To prove to the townspeople and to Shooter himself, Dale intentionally gets ejected from a game. This forces Shooter to devise a play that helps Hickory win on a last-second shot. Shooter also regains the respect of his son Everett. Despite a setback when Shooter relapses, the team advances through the state tournament with Jimmy's strong performance. Unsung players such as Short Ollie and devoutly religious Strap also contribute. Hickory reaches the championship game in Indianapolis. At Butler Fieldhouse, and before the largest crowd they have ever seen, the Huskers face long odds to defeat the heavily favored South Bend, who have a taller and more athletic players. After falling behind, Hickory fights their way back and ties the game with just a few seconds left. Dale calls his team's final timeout and sets up a play for Jimmy to put up one last shot. He scores as the game buzzer sounds, and Hickory wins the 1952 Indiana State Championship. Sometime after the game, a large black and white photograph of Coach Dale and the team with their state championship trophy is seen hanging in Hickory High School's gymnasium, with the voiceover of Dale stating, "I love you guys." The end.
Let's start talking about this movie. I like the opening scene where it's just a simple car driving through the country. You know, he's coming back to his roots, so to speak. I thought that was a nice build-up of kind of where we're going to be going with the movie, how he enters town. What were your guys' thoughts of the opening of the movie?
I don't know if we're talking about roots here, because I don't think he's ever been in this type of situation.
No, not roots like he's from Indiana, but how he's going to be setting his roots in this small town.
He's finding his basketball roots.
Nicely put.
I immediately get that he's a fish out of water. He looks different than and acts different than everybody else that he encounters. And even though there's no dialogue, you can just tell the way it's shot. This is a guy who's traveling into nowhere. So you automatically get this idea that this is a last stop for him. This is a guy who he's come to the end.
It's a last chance for him.
Right.
But everybody here, including him, are just the rudest people, I think, on the face of the planet.
Oh, yeah. Clearly.
He comes in and he's looking for the principal, and then you have I guess she's like the assistant principal. I don't know what she teaches, but she basically says, like, right off the bat, "I thought you would be younger." She's just totally rude to him for no particular reason whatsoever.
Well, he's an outsider. He's
an outsider, but I think she would be disgusted with anybody who took over the basketball team.
Unless it was someone in town. That one guy.
I don't think because of the basketball player, Jimmy, she wouldn't like anybody taking over that role because they would go after Jimmy.
Right.
I think she's just a total biatch.
Wow.
From beginning to almost end of the movie. I don't like this character. I'm going to go right off the bat and just say, this is a character we can do without. We have enough assholes over at the barbershop when he talks to all those guys that we don't need her. And the love interest doesn't do anything for me whatsoever.
No, it is a very weak
weak
love interest.
In that vein, I guess that there was a version of the movie that was originally cut.
Yeah, that dealt a little bit more into it.
That dealt more with the love interest. And they said that their love story was kind of left on the cutting room floor. So, yeah, I totally agree that the love interest is kind of... Man, it's almost kind of jarring when he does kiss her.
Oh,
it's
yeah.
Like, where did that come from?
Yeah, it just seemed totally wrong. I mean, I believe there are 18 years age difference between the two, if memory serves me correct.
Now, then we're getting into another problem immediately with the movie, because Gene Hackman, even when he was probably 21 years old, looked like he was 55. We really don't get a feel for how old Norman Dale is supposed to be. The only hint that we got was that Myra Fleener says something about a 50-year-old coaching has got to be at the end if he's coaching here.
Yeah, she doesn't want to see Jimmy end up like a 50-year-old coaching basketball here. Yeah,
but if he's going after her...
Especially later on when he says, "I've been wanting to kiss you since the first time I saw you." I'm like, oh.
I was like, no, you did. You two wanted
to put your lights out.
You two wanted to go to like 12 rounds with each other.
I'm sorry, it's just not good at all.
It really got sacrificed. I'd like to see what the stuff was that they cut.
I don't know if I want to see that. I looked for it. I don't know where this footage is.
Yeah, it's probably stuff that was probably destroyed. But it would be interesting to know, just for morbid curiosity's sake.
This movie was supposed to come in at 2 hours and 48 minutes, and they made them
cut my God. I can't.
Yeah, I can't imagine this being almost a 3-hour movie. I mean, she doesn't have any other personality than just being rude and obnoxious. Oh, once they finally kiss, she makes a joke later on when they ask him if he's going to coach at Hickory the next year, and she goes on the little horn and says, "That's a good question." But she's not friendly in any type of way. She's so one-dimensional. When they throw that at us later on, it bounces off the wall and doesn't do anything because this character is so unlikable up until that point. She falls in line with everybody else in the town that you don't like either. When he goes to the barbershop and they're just giving him the hardest time because he hasn't coached in 12 years and that he's been in the Navy, and he's rude to them. They're trying to ask him questions and he's being very dismissive of them. You know, they ask him
Right.
stuff like man-to-man or zone, and he doesn't want to get into it. He just walks away from it, which doesn't help his case either. So
Oh, no.
everybody here is treating everybody else like an asshole.
Definitely doesn't do anything to ingratiate himself to the town. The town doesn't do anything to try to accept him either. Yeah, these are problems that the movie definitely has.
Do those townspeople pay that ref off to have him ejected out of that game?
Well,
Because that's what I
that's-
believe that happened.
The way the movie's cut, after the ref kicks him out of the game, they immediately cut to, is his name George?
Yeah, sitting in the stands by himself.
Yeah, they immediately cut to him and he's got this shit-eating grin on his face. When I see that actor, I can't think of anybody but the old pitcher from Major League.
Major
That's what I
League
was
Baseball.
thinking too. Yeah.
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 That's all I can think of. I just think of Up Yours Jobu.
The one character that really bothers is the barber himself. He has the right to really just go off. Out of all the people in the town, he seems like the least likelihood to say something like, I don't know why we hired somebody who's been in the water for 11 years
Yeah.
or something like that. And I'm thinking, this is the guy you're going to choose to have the guts to say that? It's just weird. And the fact that he treats the townspeople like they're high school basketball players. I mean, he should give some of these people some respect and try to earn respect both ways, but he doesn't try to do that at all. And he almost kind of deserves a little bit of what they're dishing out.
A little bit. I do like his line that they're giving small town hospitality a bad name.
That's to
Yeah.
her at the beginning. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
a funny line.
I mean, they are. There's nothing welcoming about this. It's definitely a problem that the movie has. The tone is a little too harsh at the beginning, both ways, back and forth.
It's kind of never resolved either. I mean,
Yeah,
the townspeople we never see the townspeople warm up to him, really.
Well, they do after Jimmy starts to play basketball.
We never see a conversation between
No.
any of them, because I think some of them still want him to fail. The only people that are nice to him throughout the whole movie is Myra's mom and then
Yeah.
Shooter. Those are the only two,
Right.
and the principal. Those are
The
the only
principal,
ones that
yeah.
really are being nice to him. Everybody else is being complete jerk to him, and he's got to know that he's got to impress the town a little bit in some type of way.
Yeah, but if you've never been in that situation before, I'm not defending Normandale at all because he is kind of a jerk. If you've never been in a small town situation like that, I mean, you wouldn't know how to react either. I mean, he's kind of taken aback when they ask him about what kind of defense he's going to play, and if he's going to play zone or man-to-man. Well, we can talk about the basketball strategy later. I think he's kind of just taken aback that they would even be asking him that sort of way or giving him advice. Yeah, he definitely comes in with an arrogance that I don't know is necessarily deserved.
The whole
Considering-
movie is built on his arrogance.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
considering he punched a kid, he's not allowed to coach in
Banned.
college anymore.
Yeah.
I would have liked to know what led up to that punch. They don't want to tell us. All they could say
No.
is that the kid was one of his best players, but it was a challenge. And then I guess one day maybe the coach just lost it. But I'd like to know how Myra gets this information. She says she gets it from the library, from another town. So she gets into her vehicle, goes to another town's library, and I guess they have so much information about him as a basketball coach that she's able to pull his... I don't know. To me, that
It depends on the library that they could have gotten a New York newspaper. Let's look at this though, because Shooter does hold up a
He
picture
knows about
of
the team. Yeah.
because they were national champions in college. It could have been front page news or front page sports news, especially in Indiana, where Hoosier basketball, IU basketball, Butler basketball. I mean, these are big, and Purdue. These are big time programs, and so it's not out of the realm of possibility.
But
it could
Shooter
be-
and
it
her
could have
are the
been
only
there.
ones that seem to know this. Because if he led somebody to
Well,
a national championship team and they're big basketball people and they
I
actually
think
go to the
principal
finals.
knows it. I think
But
the principal
the
knows it.
principal definitely knows it. They go to the finals and none of the reporters are bringing any of this up.
No.
I mean,
Well,
it's
yeah.
so dismissive. Myra's the only one that really tackles it at all. And, I mean, Shooter dismisses it. He doesn't want to talk about it. He says something that you had
It's
your
in the
reasons or
past.
whatever. I think it would have been a more interesting movie if it would have came out that something did like that happen. And that's why they wanted to kick him out. That's why they wanted to replace him as coach. Some of the steps that they had here were wrong. I think it's beautifully shot. The basketball scenes are really well done. And that's because a lot of these basketball players actually played basketball. You can see full shot. It seemed like, except for Jimmy. Jimmy's always shooting, and they're always focusing on the crowd reaction when Jimmy shoots. And I guess out of all of them, he was the only one that didn't make his high school basketball team, and that they found him in a rec center that for one day that he just went off. So that's why they kind of said, hey, you need to come and try out for this part. And then, of course, he got it.
A lot of the basketball players were actually college basketball players, and they actually got in trouble for making the movie.
Well,
and
one of them actually got suspended for three games.
They had to give
5%.
part of their payback.
Like 5%
Yeah, because they were paid.
Which makes it interesting that the guy who played Ollie was actually in high school.
Right.
That's why he looks so much smaller than everybody else.
Well, everybody else
And
is
that's-
23, 24 years old.
Exactly. And he was actually in high school and actually played on his high school basketball team.
And actually, he left the set to go watch his
Right.
team play, and they
Yeah.
had to ask his mother to go get him to bring him back.
Yeah.
It kind of reminded me of how I would think as a 17, 18-year-old boy. I would think more about my friends and the people that I'm with than actually probably be on the movie set. So I thought that was kind of cool that happened. Whenever they're doing basketball, I have really no problems with any of it. I thought they did a really good job here. It's just what they make important to this movie. It just doesn't seem like it should be that important. You have a juicy story about a guy who got kicked off of coaching in college, and he's banned from college coaching.
Was successful.
This should have easily came out. They should have been able to find out. The townspeople could have used that along with being frustrated about his coaching style. The one thing that this has in common with the true story is that the coach also didn't allow outsiders to watch the practices. Mm-hmm. And that was kind of a big thing back then, because in the 1940s and 50s, early 50s, what are you going to do besides, watching your crops grow, to go watch your local sports, even if it has something to do with practice? That was kind of really important for people back then.
Yeah, I never got that from my grandparents. I never heard of them going to watch practice.
It might not be everywhere, but it was important for these people because it
obviously it was. I was, at least
Right.
for the guys, it was. It's like none of them worked because they're
Well, they
having
were all
practice
farmers.
the practice from 3 to 5.
Basically, we're all farmers. They're
But
all
the
done.
barber's there. The barber's there. Is he closing down the barber shop from 3 to
Well,
5 to?
Here's the other thing. How small is this town? Because they seem to have a lot of people at the games rooting their team on.
The way I took it, it was probably about a town of about 850 people. Really small.
That seems a big number for only, 70-something, 80-something students?
They had, 86 enrollees or something like
Yeah.
that. You do kind of get an insight into the life of the town and the area, because Ollie, he's talking about what he thinks progression is, and he ends up with indoor plumbing and, a second tractor and things like that. So it is a poor community. It's a farming community. I don't know how much they would really be at practice, but it is a thing. I can't really laugh at that, because if you go to Texas and you're in high school football, I guess high school football practice is attended almost like Friday night.
Religiously? Yeah.
Yeah,
So-
high school football in Texas is the shit.
It's religion.
It is, clearly.
It's above being a Baptist in Texas. It's football, them being a Baptist. It's a whole different life down there. I mean, in Indiana is known that for basketball. I'm kind of partial to Illinois basketball, obviously.
When I see that barber, I think of the coach walking by, and they ask him if he wants a haircut. They're all just sitting out there in the front doing nothing. So it's not like the barber's probably really busy. He
True.
probably has one of those things like, I'll be back at 5. He's probably closed for the day by 3 o'clock.
Oh, sure he
Probably.
is.
Yeah, probably. I don't know how accurate it is, but it's a look into what small town life was in the early 1950s and post-war communities like that. It's a different time. And you talk about the basketball. The basketball sequences are very well done. However, there's a part of me that it's grating a little bit. The whole pass 4 times before you take a shot. It's interesting to see how far basketball has come. I mean, this is before George Mikan made basketball have to change the dimensions of the court because they changed the lane, because they still have the narrow lane
Right.
going down. And that was changed because of George Mikan, the great Minneapolis Lakers center. It's not the Los Angeles Lakers. The Los Angeles Lakers started in Minnesota. They were the Minneapolis Lakers.
Because think about it, there are no lakes in Los Angeles.
Los Angeles.
If you look at the movie, you could see that they had to adjust the key in the lane because there's a portion there of the lane that is the wood doesn't match up to everything else. So you could see that they had to adjust it for the film. I understand what you're saying, but at the same time, that was what basketball was back then.
Yeah, I mean, this is before Bob Cousy and Pistol Pete and Oscar Robertson and Quinn Buckner and all these guys changed the game.
We said this at the beginning of the podcast. There was no shot clock, so they could take their sweet time. Like I said, there was a time where you took 4 minutes just to do one play. So doing 4 passes in itself doesn't seem to be unreasonable. And the great thing about this movie, even though it's 1950s, they speed up the game. They don't play it that way. They make it go a lot faster. So 4 passes seems legit.
Oh, yeah. No, the special edition version of Hoosiers that I purchased, it actually had the game from the Milan High School finals game on it. And it's almost unwatchable.
Yeah, I watched it on YouTube. It was
as far as entertaining.
Pretty bad, huh?
It's not entertaining basketball. If you have any love of basketball, it's very hard to watch. There was a coach I can't remember what coach said it now off the top of my head, but good basketball is played kind of like jazz. It's improvisation and movement. It's fly by the seat, and what makes it a beautiful sport. It's like Norman Dale does everything he can just to take all the joy right out of basketball. Pass 4 times, and he sits the guy who's actually trying to shoot the ball. It's like, come on, man.
That feels like a little too much. I'm going to play with my guys. My team is out there, the 4 guys.
There's I spent a lot of time around coaches. I don't know of one coach that would do that.
No, I know. It is kind of funny.
Because you're actually penalizing the rest of the team for somebody's mistake. I mean, I understand later on he goes into the locker room and he goes, I'm proud of the guys that are still out there. Well, you're not proud of the guy who fouled out? I mean,
fouled out. You know, that's what my immediate thought was.
Poor guy.
What about the poor dude who fouled out, man?
But it puts so much pressure on those other guys that are out there that it's really unfair to them. And I know you're trying to teach a lesson, but you know what? Make them run some more laps. Make them do some more heavy work.
Right.
You know, or
run washboards.
Yeah, I think, what would happen if somebody got injured? You'd play with 3? I mean, it's a joke later on, right after they say that. Are you going to play with 3 next time? Some of the things are a little bit heavy-handed. Especially, you know, when you were talking about the basketball, the only problem I have with the basketball is that every game came down to the wire.
Yes.
Never any blowouts, right?
Never any blowouts, except for them. On their side, they could get blown out. But every game that they won, they won in the last minute of the game. I mean, I love the fact that the kid wins the game by throwing the Rick Barry under your legs free throw.
We called it a granny shot.
Right. I'm happy with that. But it's like the 3rd or 4th game in a row that they are a nail biter.
Right.
And then you make him the one that kind of like cost you almost the game and then reverse it around and make him hit the shots.
Yeah.
Why don't we see something like earlier on in the movie where we see him practicing those type of shots? That's all he does, is he's just shooting those type of free throws. I feel like these kids didn't have no background whatsoever. You have Shooter's son, who has a little bit of a background because he has to deal with his father, but nobody else seems to have really any real backstory whatsoever. You have Jimmy, who only has 4 lines in the frickin' movie.
He speaks exactly 30 words.
3 of those lines are during the meeting to save the coach. And
Yes,
the only
I
other
know.
line he says later on is, I can make it.
I'm surprised he didn't get a Best Supporting Actor nomination.
I mean, he's one of your focal characters in the whole movie. When he says that he loves his players, I love you guys, when Gene Hackman says that, I'm like, why do you love these guys? I haven't seen no real interaction with these players throughout the whole movie. But somehow you guys have bonded. How the heck have you bonded? You know, just
because it all came down to the end.
Yeah.
Because you guys won a lot of last-second games because Jimmy decided to come back. I hate that. I would love to have seen, like, you have the one guy who keeps on disobeying the coach. Maybe he has that one-on-one sit-down that changes his life forever. It changes his ways forever. It's just frustrating to see no character development in practically anybody in this movie but Gene Hackman. Because Gene Hackman was, what, in this movie 98% of the time? Mm-hmm. Is there a scene without Gene Hackman? I mean,
Hold on. Let me think. I don't think so.
Unless he gets kicked out of a basketball game, which
I
technically he was.
I got it. I got your scene when he's visiting Shooter. When
son.
Shooter's son is visiting his
All right,
and
we
he's
got a
arguing
scene.
with the nurse. Yeah.
Yep,
there you go.
and then Shooter teaches him how to do the picket fence.
Right.
He's not in that scene. So it's
That's
like 2 scenes.
That's because he just got kicked out of that scene.
Right,
So
right.
I would have loved to have seen a little bit more between Shooter and his son.
I do like Dennis Hopper's character.
Oh, I like his character.
Yeah.
In fact, I want to see a little bit more. But in fact, I'm kind of puzzled why the town doesn't embrace him more, because he sounds like he's the greatest player to ever come out of that area.
Well, he's
And
a
usually
drunk.
He's a drunk, but usually those guys are celebrated still.
Oh,
Because
yeah. No, definitely. I can attest to that.
the last straw seemed to be hiring him as an assistant coach.
Yeah. This is one of those things you be careful what you wish for because of what the possibilities would have been had it happened. But you almost want to know what caused him to become an alcoholic. Was it that he had to go away to the war or something of that nature? Just a little bit of information as to what caused him to go from a high school basketball hero or a GOAT because he missed the shot.
But he was fouled.
Yeah.
That's what he says. He was fouled.
So that's what every basketball player says. They
Right.
missed the shot. What caused him to
What if he knocked up his
go down that road?
girlfriend early? It was a teen pregnancy. I mean, he looks like he's probably in his early 40s. When did he say he played basketball? Didn't he say that there was a year that he played
33.
So what he said, 33, and this is 18 years later. So he's 35, 36 years old.
Mhm.
So this could be pregnancy right out of high school, and that's
True.
why the marriage didn't work, because it was too quick. Those are the kind of things we want to see. I mean, how did he end up in the house that he? I mean, that's pretty nasty. I guess his son lives with them, and how are they going to get this new house that his son's promising? By the way,
I don't think that house had running electricity or indoor
No,
plumbing.
no.
Seriously.
No, he's got a fire to keep himself warm.
Yeah, it was
He
pretty
said
creepy.
says it's rough during the winters, but they manage.
Yeah.
So, Dennis Hopper does a really nice job. I really do like him in this movie. I love the trick that he used from James Dean, where he learned how to
Yes.
walk like a drunk. So he spun around for about, I think it was 10 to 30 seconds or something like that. He asked the director to give him, a heads up, because that's something that James Dean would have done. And Hopper was in a movie with James Dean that he learned that trick. And I thought that was an interesting way to act like you're drunk by spinning yourself around multiple times until you can barely walk, and it takes some time for you to fully get a hold of yourself. So there's nothing wrong with the performances. I do think some of the dialogue is kind of and again, like I said, Myra's character is just, no, I can't deal with her. But Gene Hackman and Dennis Hopper are great here. In fact, it's funny because Gene Hackman hated doing this movie. He told Dennis Hopper during that montage scene where they're talking to each other and they're laughing, Gene Hackman's telling him that he hopes that he, invested well, because this is probably the last movie they'll ever do, because they thought this was a career killer. In fact, they were a little worried about Gene Hackman coming back to
Do the
his
voiceover.
lines, do his voiceover lines, yes, because of how much he hated doing this movie. He gave so much anxiety to the director. The director one day had trouble getting up because he was
like
so
nervous breakdown almost.
yeah, which I never heard of anything about Gene Hackman before like that. I guess he didn't do it on set. He did it after takes, privately with him and things of that nature. But it just
He's always been a notoriously prickly
man.
prickly guy.
Prickly
He's not
guy,
the
yeah.
easiest.
It's a first time movie director. I mean, he had done
not
TV
the
shows.
easiest. He's not the easiest person to work with. I think a lot of these problems that we've talked about, you have really a first-time writer and a first-time director, and I think both of them are Indiana guys. They're clouded by their own love for the mystique. There's not really a critical eye to be had. And I'll discuss this a lot with my review, but there are problems that we've discussed here. The performances are great. Even the kids, I mean, we don't know a whole lot about them, but they do their parts very well.
They have no lines. Of course they're going to do their parts well.
The only person here that really is not allowed to shine is Barbara Hershey.
Mm-hmm.
And she is a very good actress. One of her best roles that I can remember is in Beaches. Well,
Sorry.
I
Sorry,
mean,
had
you can say that,
hairball.
but you can say that, but it's she was very good in that movie.
She's incredibly good in Beaches. You don't like Beaches,
Yeah,
Kevin?
No, it's not my thing.
Okay.
Not my type of movie.
she is an accomplished actress, and it's kind of unfortunate that she's relegated to this very
Minimal role.
minimal and uneven role.
Unlikable role.
Yeah,
That's my thing. She's just unlikable. You needed somebody who was a bit older, not extremely older, but the 18 years of difference I think is important. And I would like to have a little bit more backstory on her. What happened to her brother? Do we know what happened to her brother?
She had brothers, didn't she?
She said something about when her brother played basketball. It was like,
Oh, I thought it was two. I thought there was two.
maybe there was two. It doesn't matter because we don't know about either one of them because it seems like the only
No.
one that stayed in town was her.
She's the one that had to come back after her dad died and her mom got sick.
Right, and then he accuses her of not leaving in the first place. Like I said, there's lines in here that kind of just don't fit. If you're going to say things like that, I need a little bit more about what happened to her. Give me a little bit more of a well-rounded character in that situation. I don't need one from Dennis Hopper, from Shooter. I don't really need it because he's a drunk. We're trying to get him sober. And one thing I like about Dennis Hopper in this movie is the fact that they wanted his character to show up in the finals. That he escaped the hospital and showed up there. But Hopper, who just stopped drinking himself, got cleaned. He said, I don't want that to happen to Shooter. I want Shooter to stay in the hospital because that's what Shooter needs to do. And I thought that was really a good thing because I think him showing up at the game is unnecessary. There's just no...
That would have been very unnecessary.
Yeah. Like a lot of things in this movie. There's a lot of unnecessary things in this. And I think this movie is saved just because of Hackman and Dennis Hopper's performances. And the basketball. I still think the basketball is really good. You have one kid who... I'm gonna steal something from you, Ted, from our 101 episode, who looks like he's almost 30. He's got more hair on his chest than Bigfoot. I mean, he's actually, I think, about 24 years old at the time that this movie was filmed. But it's not as egregious as One-on-One with that one guy who was a football player. So it's not that bad.
Professional football player.
It's like a wrestler, man. He was crazy.
Yeah.
There's things that you could have took out of this movie and replaced it with some much-needed background. And I know I haven't preached background in a long time, but this is a movie that I just feel could have used a little bit more, especially for Barbara Hershey, because I think of the fact that we needed her to be more well-rounded because she's the love interest. I think this is a problem with some of these 80s and 90s movies. They throw sometimes love interest in there just to have a love interest in there, to get married couples or couples into this to go see the movie together. If that's why you're going to go see the movie is because you think you have a love story, you're going to be highly disappointed in this love story.
Yeah, you'd have some explaining to do if you were taking your significant other that this was going to be a love story. One of the things, though, that I find the most inconsistent is the score. And Jerry Goldsmith's score was the other thing nominated from this picture, the first being Dennis Hopper's character. The score here is either really good or it's really bad.
Isn't this the same guy who did The Omen?
I believe so, Jerry Goldsmith. Yeah. It's either good and I really like it and it adds so much to what's going on, or it's kind of annoying. And
when do you not like it? Because I kind of like the score in general. When do you not like it?
There's a couple of times where it's just, I don't care for the music itself. It doesn't seem like it fits. I wouldn't have made that particular choice if it was me. But
was it during the kissing scenes?
Well, that's yeah. I mean, it just is odd sometimes. And Ken, you had mentioned that you liked how it was shot. There are some scenes that are really shot really well. But I don't know if it's the film stock or the color palette that they're using or the camera ratio or what. But this movie has a very similar feel aesthetically to Mississippi Burning. I get that same sort of feeling as far as like everything is kind of darker. It's very muted as far as the colors and everything. I don't know if it was an 80s thing or this mid 80s
period thing, because aren't we also going back Mississippi Burning happens in
You're right,
the 60s, right?
in the 60s.
Yeah.
It has a very muted feeling, and it really hit me these last couple of times watching it. I was just like, wow, it's kind of shocking how similar they feel.
And we got to do
As
that
far as
movie.
that.
I love Mississippi Burning. That's probably my favorite
It's a
Gene
great
Hackman
movie.
of all time.
That's one of those movies that Shawshanks me, where no matter where I come at it, I've come to it, I have to watch the rest of it because I have to see the Klan guys go to jail.
I agree.
My
about
favorite
you,
Hackman
Scott?
movie is The Conversation from 1974.
Right,
Also
since-
nominated for a few Academy Awards.
Yes.
So on
Yeah.
the fact that you're a big Gene Hackman fan,
Yes.
and you've never seen this movie
Never.
before,
Nope.
what do you think of Hackman's performances and other people's performances in this movie?
I like Gene Hackman's performance in this movie a lot. He plays the part of a very arrogant coach quite well, especially in the 1950s. Some of the things that kind of struck me about his persona was, for someone that's coming out of the military for the last 10 years, he doesn't really have that military attitude. You know, regiment, kind of, I would expect more of a things in order kind of thing for someone who's almost like a career guy for the last 10 years, especially coming out of a world war. That was one of the things that struck me odd. I'm going to go on the opposite side of you because I don't like Dennis Hopper's performance in this. I'm not a real Dennis Hopper fan to begin with, but I did not think he was really milled for this part. I don't know. The backstory might have helped out a little bit, but I really did not feel for Dennis Hopper. He was actually quite annoying in this. And yeah, Barbara Hershey, I mean, she didn't even need to be in this movie. Let's be honest. You could have put anyone in there to be a difficult, and it wouldn't have made a difference. And Barbara Hershey was quite a big name at this time, too. So I'm very surprised. I believe Hannah and her sisters. Was she in Hannah and her sisters? I think she was.
I believe so.
The overall feel of the movie, I think it's got a pretty positive theme. I like that. It's no secret I'm not a big basketball fan, so it really did not keep my attention with the drills and just the banter between the players and the teams and stuff. But overall, it wasn't bad. Now that you point out about the film technique, kind of like the color spectrum of it, you're right, it is kind of a different feel, and it is a lot like Mississippi Burning, which is also a favorite movie of mine, but it wasn't bad at all.
Kind of surprised by the Dennis Hopper thing, because I'm not a big Dennis Hopper fan either. I'm not an Easy Rider kind of guy.
No.
And he made another movie during that time, which he thought he should have got nominated for instead of this movie, which was Blue Velvet. I'm not a big fan of that movie. But I'm going to disagree with you. I think here he does a really good job of a guy who the only thing he really knows was basketball, and then life must have thrown him a curveball that all this happened to him. Like I said, the scenes where he comes in and he's drunk and comes on the court, the way he acts when he's in that suit and tie and he's coming in. First of all, during the middle of the game, right? It looked like it was towards the end of the game. I believe they showed the score, and I thought this guy's coming in like third, fourth quarter, dressed up as an assistant. If I'm Gene Hackman, if I'm the coach right there, I'm like, thank you for showing up, but you could sit down right now because I told you to be on time. You know, and the first thing you do is show up really late. But I think his performances are good. I love him, especially when he's detoxing, when he's cold. You know, he's apologizing for all the things he's done. I'm buying it. The best acting that he's doing is when he's in the hospital. I really appreciate his character for that. I would like to know how he knows about all these different teams. If he's drunk all the time, how the heck does he get to these games? I don't think he has a car or anything like that, and so I'm just kind of curious how he's able to scout all these teams that he knows when he's a drunk.
I didn't feel connected. I mean, I really did not feel connected to his character, his part. I don't know. I could think of half a dozen people that probably could have played that part. And generally, when I think of Dennis Hopper, I think of a drunk anyway, so you think he'd be the perfect guy to play the part. But I didn't feel the love. I didn't feel the connection. And I think it kind of hurt the movie a little bit. But who am I? He was nominated for Best Supporting Actor, so obviously I'm in the minority on this one.
Well, we've mentioned before that the Academy sometimes gives a nomination for the wrong performance, and he probably should have been nominated for Blue Velvet. I know David Lynch is not for everybody, but
No, not for me.
his
I do
his
think he
performance there was amazing. getting into an argument over Easy Rider, that's an argument that we could have another day, because I love Easy Rider up until the end.
But he's good
Yeah,
here.
it's-
I think he.
No,
I think
he
he's-
is. He really is. I hate the fact that kind of after this movie, the next best thing that I like him in is in True Romance.
And Speed.
I don't. I
know you don't. Like
here
Speed.
you go with Speed again.
I like Speed.
I don't know what your attraction is to that god awful movie. It's probably the same attraction that I have to Fast and the Furious. So I'm not gonna yuck on your yum. But I hate the fact that Dennis Hopper kind of became a caricature of himself in his later work, and that's unfortunate because he did do some groundbreaking stuff, especially with the Easy Rider stuff. He helped usher in a new era of movie making that enabled Spielberg, Lucas, and Bogdanovich, and people like that. It was a shift in the movie making.
Yeah, old Hollywood to new Hollywood.
Right. It is kind of sad that he became that person that was in Speed and stuff like that. It's funny, too, that we had mentioned Hackman, because the person who really wanted this role was Jack Nicholson, and Jack Nicholson couldn't fit it into his schedule.
Yeah, the go to court.
I mean, I could see Jack in just about any role. I love Jack Nicholson, but I can't see him as Norman Dale.
No, I can't see him.
He'd be too scary.
He made a joke to the director that if he actually was in the film, that it would be a mega hit.
Mega hit, yeah.
That would be even bigger than it was before. This is not a Speed podcast, but I just want to say the tomato meter, 94% on Speed. Just
my
want to
goodness.
put it out there.
I'm amazed this one's at 91. When you said it was 91 and the audience was 80-something, I'm like, what? Wow.
Well,
it's a feel-good movie. It's a Rocky movie. It's
a
overcoming
feel-good
the odds.
movie.
It is.
You know.
It is, and it's one that's
And
cherished,
I mean,
like you said.
I think that we've probably concentrated a lot on the negative aspects here, and we've kind of picked it apart a little bit.
That's what we do.
Yeah, it is kind of what we do. But there is a lot to like in this movie. I think that if you can overlook some of the flaws, it is a fun movie. It is a feel-good movie. I mean, AFI really liked this movie a lot, too. It's on numerous AFI lists.
Yeah, top 5 sports movie of all time.
Yeah, there is a lot to really like about this movie. And
Top
I think
5? Is it ahead of Major League?
Mm-hmm. Major League was not nearly as liked as what the fans liked.
Is Chariots of Fire considered a sports movie?
Yes.
Probably. That's based off of Roger Bannister making the first 4-minute mile. You want to talk about iconic scores. That is one of the most iconic scores by Vangelis. Or Vangelis. I don't know how it's pronounced.
Actually, we didn't even talk about the player who praised the god. I thought his character was kind of interesting. I love the fact that, he sits there and prays and waits to God give him the command. I thought what they did, which was cool and not cool at the same time, each character kind of had their own
gimmick. Yeah.
You had the defiant kid. You had the kid that was dedicated to God. You had the kid that could shoot a basketball like there was no tomorrow. You had the character who had a drunk dad. I mean, each character had their own thing. No two characters were the same.
Well, let's talk about our reviews of this movie. I'll kick it off since I'm the version of the group here who has only seen it this week. Earlier, you kind of asked my opinion of the movie, and I gave you kind of an abbreviated summary of it. So this movie is interesting. It's definitely a movie of its era. If you think about it, it takes place in 1951. It's made in 1986. So you're talking a 35-year difference. I think Gene Hackman does a very good job in this movie, and you've made some good points that he's in like 95% of the scenes. So if you don't like Gene Hackman, you're not going to like this movie. I obviously have flaws with Dennis Hopper overall in this movie and in general as an actor, but that's here nor there. My other bias is I'm not a real basketball fan, so I love sports movies, but I'm not a basketball fan. For me to sit down and really get involved in this movie was difficult because not only is it basketball, but it's high school basketball, and I really have no interest in high school basketball. But they did a very good job of making this movie flow. It is definitely one of those movies that is a feel-good movie. You know it's going to end positively, but you don't know how it's going to get there. And they do a really good job of getting you to that point and to actually kind of like the characters. Just the theme of the movie is just something that I couldn't wrap myself around. So for me, it really didn't keep my attention. Now, someone like you guys or other people that probably really like basketball, you're going to have a completely different view and vision of this movie. But I think it's a winning movie. I love Gene Hackman in it. And it's definitely a movie I would recommend for people that love basketball, that love sports. But it's not, in my opinion, not a top 5 sports movie of all time. Probably not even a top 15 sports movie of all time. But it's definitely one that I would probably watch again. I probably should watch again. I'll probably like it a little bit more. But at this point, it's a B minus. And if it was a baseball movie or a football movie about high school sports, I probably would have liked it a lot more. But that's here nor there. So B minus for me. Ken, what are your thoughts?
This movie is really hard for me because when I first saw it at the age of 14, 15 years old, I felt like this was the best sports movie I ever saw. Either that or Rocky at the time. As the years have gone by, unfortunately, I've picked apart this movie myself. Didn't need the podcast to do it. There are things that I realized as I get older that there are scenes that are just heavy-handed. Giving the speech about to the guys, telling them that he loves them, when I felt like the only thing they went through together was a basketball season, and you really didn't show me enough interaction personally with your players to really even say that. The Barbara Hershey Myra character annoys the crap out of me. It's one of those characters that is going to lower the grade of this movie. This movie, though, does have strong performances by Gene Hackman and Dennis Hopper. Love their scenes together. Love how they approached their character. It's kind of one of those things now, what other head coach characters and drunks are kind of what they use. They probably use this movie as basis for their characters. So I do think age hasn't helped this movie much. The things that I really enjoy are the basketball scenes. Me and Ted had mentioned the locations, the basketball courts, the gyms, and how they looked at the time. It felt very authentic. And then when you build that up to going to the big university to play the final game, the finals, it means so much more. When those kids see this big arena for the first time, I believe they're shock and awe because of how big it is. So there's a lot of things that they do extremely well here too. The grade is really hard for me to put a final stamp on for whatever reason. I want to give it a B plus, but I feel like it just slightly falls short of that B plus. But if I give it a B, I feel like I'm not giving it enough credit. So I'm kind of in between that B plus area. Even though there's too many last second shots and too many wins at the end where they had to overcome all these odds. But still at the end of the day, you're happy that the boys won. You're happy that the small little school overcame the big giant. So at the end of the day, I will finish it off with a B plus.
Okay, that's cool. Ted, what do you got?
We kind of came at this movie, and it's interesting, Ken, that you had mentioned at the beginning of your review about how things have changed for you with this movie, because it's kind of exactly what's kind of happened with me. This movie, for me, is all about nostalgia. There are times still at age 43 and living up here in the Chicagoland area that on a Friday night or a Saturday night, I still miss not going to a high school basketball game, because that's what we did when I was growing up. We went to high school basketball games in the winter, and then being part of the team in high school, traveling with the team, it just brings back so many emotions. There's a lot here that is not part of the movie for me. So my attachment to the movie is going to be greater than the grade that I give the movie, because this is a movie that I'll always watch. And I'll watch it every March. There's still something about the whole idea of March Madness and high school basketball that I don't think I'll ever be able to get really truly out of my system. It's just what we did. It's what we talked about. It was big to us. The movie itself, we discussed a lot of its flaws. I think that in some of the stuff that was probably cut and put on the floor may have helped some parts of this movie, but it may not have. There's just no way to know. I do like Dennis Hopper here. I do like Gene Hackman. I think that they really carry the movie. I think everybody else is just kind of window dressing. This movie at the end of the day is going to be a B plus for me. But in my heart, it's more. But I know in reality, it's going to be a B plus. It's not an A movie. But in my heart, it's an A. because it hits all the feels. That's just how I'm built that way. But I'm going to stick with my B+. It's not going to change the fact that even though it's crazy, I still love this movie. And we couldn't have done a series of movies in March without including Hoosiers. I mean, this is the basketball movie because it actually does basketball kind of well, which basketball is insanely hard. The only harder sport to put on film to make it look real is football, because you can't play football at half speed. And basketball is another thing that's insanely hard to put on film. And I think they do a really good job with the basketball scenes. It looks legitimately like basketball.
It sounds like out of all the movies we've done, me and Ted, we've had the same grade on some movies and that sort, but I think me and you kind of mirror each other on this one more than I think
exactly
more movies than the other movies that we've done, which is very interesting coming into this, because this was the movie you picked for our March Madness month, and we kind of fell right at the same line. We liked the same things. We're disappointed by the same things. It's kind of interesting. Whereas Eric was basically disappointed by everything. Anyway.
Yeah,
but he still gave it a B-.
I enjoyed the movie. I really did enjoy the movie.
It's hard not to.
It is. It's very hard not to enjoy this movie, even if you're not a real basketball fan. But I think if I loved basketball more, I would probably enjoy this movie more.
I thought the pacing wasn't too bad for a 2-hour movie. It didn't feel like a 2-hour movie to me. But again, like I said earlier, I felt like there were scenes that you could have pulled away and added some depth to the characters. Like Ted said earlier, there was additional love scenes that could have been added on to this movie that they cut, because this movie was originally 2 hours and 48 minutes, cut down to an hour and 55 minutes.
That's a lot of love scenes. That's a lot of love scenes.
All of a sudden, my grade goes down.
248? Ooh.
Yeah. I don't think adding more would have saved that, but like I said, subtracting the love scenes that you're trying to already have and putting putting something else in its place would have been nice.
All right. Well, that's all we have for Hoosiers. We're going to be doing the third movie in our series here for March Madness. We're going back to 1994 for William Friedkin's directed movie Blue Chips with Nick Nolte.
Freakins, we're back to Freakin. Is going to beat up people again?
That's right.
Maybe.
Well,
you never know.
He's going to shoot a gun in the air.
Shaq's going to tear shit up.
That's right. We're going to a more modern feel of basketball now.
I don't think Nick Nolte's going to let him do that crap that he did, on The Exorcist.
Yeah, Nolte would probably hit him back.
Probably would now, yeah.
Well, if he did it now, you'd be beating up a corpse, but...
Nice. So this one's my pick, so we're looking forward to watching this one, getting everyone's view on it. Ted, where can they find us out there on the World Wide Web?
We can be found on Twitter at @hookedon_movies. And whatever podcast format you're listening to us on, whether it be Apple, Spotify, Anchor, Good Pods, if you can, hit subscribe, leave us a 5-star review. It helps us get noticed. And the more reviews we get, the closer we get to possibly becoming Rotten Tomatoes certified, which would be kind of cool.
Yeah, I think that'd be very cool. Ken, Facebook, a lot of great stuff out there.
Yes, join the discussion on Facebook, Hooked on Movies. Just go ahead and look us up and request to be part of the group, and we'll approve you, and you can be part of that discussion. We would love to have you.
All right. Well, that's all the time we have for this episode, folks. Thank you for listening.
As always, I'm Not Wearing Any Pants film at 11.
See you at the movies.
See you next time on Hooked on Movies.